Everything you need to ace American history in one big pack notebook. American history. The Spanish Armada. There are lots of reasons for Europe countries to be competitive around that time. The theory of Torresel between Spain and Portugal split the world, so Spain won the western half and Portugal on the eastern half. Other European countries didn't recognize the threat because they saw how much profit they could make for exploration. The economic theory of mercantilism said that a nation's power was in its wealth. European countries competed more than ever to establish colonies to get raw material and gain new markets for export. The Protestant Reformation also created rivalry. When Elizabeth I, the Protestant became Queen of England in 1558, she ordered sailors to attack Spanish ships. Spain was a Catholic nation, as they transported gold and silver back from America. She wanted to gain the wealth from the New World without incurring the expense of having colonies. One of the most successful and daring of these English sailors was Sir Francis Drake. To the English, he was an adventurer. To the Spanish, he was a pirate. In response, in 1588, King Philip sent a mighty Spanish armada, the fleet of 130 ships, to conquer the English. The two navies met in the English Channel, and England was the winner. Spain never regained its previous power, and other nations saw they could challenge Spanish claim in the New World. More European colonies. The first British colonies and the rise to 1500 explorer Sir Walter Raleigh received a charter. He sent an expedition in 1584 to settle land they'd call Virginia. Charter, permission from the monarch to start a colony. The next year, the expedition founded a colony on Rock Island. In present-day North Carolina, lack of food forced the settler to sail back to England after a year. Virginia, after Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. In 1587, a group of about 150 English settlers tried again in the same place. One of the leaders, John White, returned to England for supplies but couldn't come back for 3 years. War between England and Spain made travel difficult. When he returned to Roanoke, the people had vanished. The first people born in the Americas to British parents, Virginia Dare, was John White's granddaughter. What happened to her and the other settlers is still a mystery. Her colony is now called the Lost Colony. Atlantic Ocean, Virginia, North Carolina, Roanoke. In the Americas, more European colonies in the Americas, French colonies. In 1608, French explorer Samuel de Champlain founded a trading post in Quebec, where an active fur and metal trade developed. The local Native Americans did much of the work trapping beavers and other animals. A number of Catholic priests also lived in New France, as the colony was named on a mission to convert the locals. In 1682, Lino Robert Calabala Stevele de la Salle sailed the length of the Mississippi River and claimed an area including what is now Louisiana for the France. When he reached the southern end, the French later founded a trading post then in what is now New Orleans. In the 1700s, the French established trading posts in present-day Detroit and Michigan and St. Louis and Missouri. Atlantic Ocean, New France, Quebec, Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans. Because of this French explorer, French culture in North America is still concentrated in the province of Quebec and the state of Louisiana. Dutch colonies. The Dutch staked their claim in the Hudson River Valley in 1614. They set up Port Nassau near modern-day Albany. The Dutch West India Company established the colony of New Netherlands in 1621 along the river. In 1626, Peter Minuit possessed the island of Manhattan from the local people, the Manati, for what has been described as $24 worth of goods, but it's a bit more than in modern dollars, though still not very much. The city of New Amsterdam, today's New York City, became a prosperous center of the fur trade. Port Nassau, North River, Hudson River, New Amsterdam, Atlantic Ocean. The Manhattan probably considered the sale to be more of a risk for hunting and use right. The Deutsche West India Company was a chartered company. In the kind of business, investors joined to explore and trade together. With the support of the government of their home country, the government also gave permission to negotiate with foreign leaders and own colonial land. The Deutsche East India Company, which did business in India and Asia, was another chartered company. Unit 2, Colonial America, 1607 to 1780s. The 1600s and 1700s were a time of transition. Colonial and the institution of slavery were established along with the trade networks, regional identities, and in the end, states. The goal of the first English settlers in Virginia were very different from the goal of those who followed. Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and George Washington, who were all born in Virginia, viewed themselves as British living in the New World. They wouldn't stand being denied their rights as Englishmen. Chapter 4, Slavery in the America. The plantation wanted cheap labor slaveries. Sugar became a major export to Europe, but harvesting sugar cane involved tough conditions. Initially, Native Americans were forced to work on Spanish and Portuguese plantations. Disease from the Columbian exchange and constant labor killed much of this population. The Spanish and Portuguese decided they needed another source of labor, slavers. Sugar became known as white gold. Most sugar plantations were in the West Indies. Slavery, the practice of one person legally owning another in voluntary servitude for life, passed down to future generations. When the British began to set up tobacco plantations in North America, they needed more laborers. By the 1700s, sadly, even colony Indo-Americans imported slaves from Africa. Plantation owners thought that Africans were ideal workers for a plantation because they were far from home, so they didn't have a free place to run away to, unlike many Native Americans who ran from the terrible work conditions. Plantation owners could enslave the slaves' children. Many of the slaves had been farmers, so they had experience. They already had immunity to the disease that killed Native Americans. The triangular trade. The slave trade was part of the triangular trade. A trade routed three stops: Africa, the West Indies, and the Americas. American colonies: rum and lion, Africa, slave gold, West Indies, sugar and molasses. The triangular trade was just one part of the large exchange of goods and slaves that included Europe. For example, Europe had manufactured goods like textiles, but needed raw material like fur and tobacco. Africa had slaves, but needed manufacturing goods. The West Indies had raw material like sugar and molasses, and wanted slaves. And New England had rum made from molasses and iron, but needed more goods. South America, North America, Europe, Africa. Middle Passage. Trade slave for sugar. Trading sugar for rum. Trading sugar for goods. Trade for goods. Trade rum for slaves. Trade goods for slaves. Trade goods for sugar. The middle passage, middle leg of the triangular trade, when ships left Africa with a cargo of slaves, was the middle passage, because slaves were considered war property. They were crammed together, given little food, exposed to disease, and otherwise abused and mistreated. About 15% died during the middle passage en route to the colonies. Father Recchino was a slave brought to Virginia from Africa in the 1700s as a child. After buying his freedom, he wrote an autobiography depicting the horror of slavery, which helped influence British lawmakers to abolish the slave trade. Laws about slavery. Many colonies enacted slave codes. Slave codes varied from colony to colony, but they all considered slaves property and granted them almost no right. Slave codes were meant to define the status of a slave, as well as the owner's responsibility to them to discourage slaves from running away. Those who did try to escape were severely punished. Not the color, more like being marooned on an island. Runaway slaves in Latin America were known as Maroons. Maroons famous community in forests and swamps, sometimes joined with Native Americans. Slaves also rebelled. The Snort Rebellion of 1737, the New York City Conspiracy of 1741, and Gabriel's Conspiracy of 1800 are just a few examples. The beginning of African American cultures. Slaves came from all over Western Africa and were spread out once they arrived because of the diaspora. Diaspora, migration, moving from one place to another, that involves the spreading out of people from the same homeland or culture. African slaves in the Americas formed a new culture built from their differing backgrounds and their common experience. Some characteristics of the new slave cultures. Religion. Most slaves were converted to Christianity but still retained their African tradition. Religion was important in daily life and spirituals became a major element of it. Spiritual. A religious folk song created by enslaved African people in the Americas. Song, dance, and storytelling. Influenced by African traditional song, dance, and storytelling were also used to teach. Family. Family was the central unit of society, even though the slave trade often split families apart. Chicken or egg. Racism, cause and effect. As African became associated with slavery, it has previously been a social distinction rather than a the racial one. Racism took hold in the Americas. Racism, the belief that some races are inferior, also justified using anyone of African descent as a slave, which was convenient for the slave owners who relied on the system of slavery. Racism and slavery were not part of the cause and effect chain, they were the part of a vicious cycle.